themselves by misleading others, deceiving others. Who was that? None other than Satan, the devil. He craved the worship that rightfully belonged to Jehovah. So what did he do? Rebelled against Jehovah, got other demons to follow him in his rebellion. What did they do? Pretend to have the right worship. Pretend to be real gods. They mislead people and they promote false worship in the world today. When it comes to fake goods, some people do know that they are fake goods, but they're prepared to accept it because it requires less money to buy them, or it requires less effort to get hold of these goods. And so it is with false worship. Some people are truly deceived into thinking that it is true worship, but you do have those that know it's false, know it's fake, but they're prepared to accept it because it doesn't require much effort from them. So what we've seen, true worship, false worship. All other worship, other than the worship of Jehovah God, really serves the purposes of Satan. Jesus Christ, when he was on earth, used an illustration to show the difference between true and false worship. Let's take a look at his illustration by turning to Matthew chapter 7. And we're going to have a look at verses 13 and 14. Jesus says, "Go in through the narrow gate, because broad is the gate, and spacious is the road leading off into destruction, and many are going in through it. Whereas narrow is the gate, and cramped the road leading off into life, and few are finding it." So Jesus talks about this broad road, this spacious road, and he says that many are on this road. That's the road of false worship. There are many in the world that are on this road, that are part of false religion. What will be the end result or the fate for false religion? Well, it's going to be destroyed, as Jesus says. But he goes on to describe this narrow, cramped road, and he says, few are finding it. Why few? Well, in comparison to all the population on earth, the amount of true worshippers is relatively few compared to the rest of mankind. But Jesus says this road leads to life, everlasting life. And if we just take a look at the picture, we can see two different types of roads. The one is a very busy 6-lane highway. Where does it lead to? It leads to a concrete jungle. Those on the road are impatient. If there's an accident, it's normally chaos. There's road rage, all sorts of things on that kind of road. And it leads to everlasting destruction. But if we look at the other road, it's a beautiful path, isn't it? Few people walking on it, but they're doing so in a calm, respectful manner. Where's it leading to? A beautiful paradise. And when they reach that paradise, they can live there for all eternity. Thank you. We can take the picture down. So these two different roads, one leading to false worship, one leading to true worship. As we've seen, true worship originates with the Almighty Creator. It makes sense then that Jehovah has the right to determine how we should worship him, doesn't it? Just think about if you want to build a house. So what would you normally do? First thing is you buy a piece of land, then you need to get plans, building plans for the house that you want to build. You need to get those plans approved by the municipality, and then you need to find yourself a builder who can build your house. But now let's say as the builder's going along and he's building the house according to the plans say a 3-bedroom house, you say to him, well, let's throw in a 4th bedroom just to make it a little more comfortable. Maybe the plans had 2 bathrooms. You say, well, let's throw in a 3rd bathroom just again for convenience. What will be the result? The building inspector comes to inspect your house and it's going to fail the inspection, isn't it? So all that hard work that went into building the house was completely in vain. And it's the same with true worship. If we do not worship Jehovah in the way that he approves, all the effort that we put into could be in vain. Jehovah has given us plans for our worship, for our house of faith. Where do we find those plans? Let's turn to 2 Timothy chapter 3. 2 Timothy chapter 3, and we're going to look at verses 16 and 17. All scripture is inspired of God and beneficial for teaching, for reproving, for setting things straight, for disciplining in righteousness, so that the man of God may be fully competent, completely equipped for every good work. So it says, the Bible is inspired of God. So in other words, the Bible is our plans, our building plans for our house of faith, our house of worship. It says there that the Bible is beneficial for teaching, reproving, setting things straight, disciplining in righteousness. Why? So that the man of God may be fully competent, completely equipped. So in other words, the Bible helps us to serve Jehovah the way that he approves, the way that he wants us to serve him. So we want to now have a look at some common beliefs, religious practices that we find in the world today, and we want to see how these beliefs, practices compare to Jehovah's word, to his thinking. So the first one is the worship of and through images. This is something that we see very common in the world today. People worship images, or they use images to worship through to reach their gods. People have these images in their homes, they wear them on their bodies, they tattoo them on their bodies. But how does Jehovah feel about the worship of him through images? Well, let's take our Bibles and go to Exodus chapter 20. Let's see how Jehovah feels about using images or idols in worship. We're going to read verse 4 and 5. Jehovah says, you must not make for yourself a carved image or a form like anything that is in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. You must not bow down to them, nor be enticed to serve them. For I, Jehovah your God, am a God who requires exclusive devotion. And we'll stop there. So it's very clear how Jehovah feels about using these idols and these images. He says we must not do so. Why? Because he requires and expects our exclusive devotion. The Bible speaks about a man who chops down a tree. He cuts up some of the tree, makes himself a fire, warms himself with the fire, cooks some food on the fire. But then what does he do? He takes some of the tree, he carves it into a little image, a little idol, and then he bows down and worships that thing. Really doesn't make sense, does it? It's actually ridiculous if we think about it. And so it shows the futility of using such things in worship. What about the use of spiritism in worship? Well, where does spiritism originate? With Jehovah's worst enemy, Satan. Jehovah is our best friend. So would we want to have anything to do with our best friend's greatest enemy? Definitely not. And so we have to be careful when it comes to the movies we watch, the books we read, the music we listen to. We want to make sure that none of it is tainted by spiritism. What about ancestor worship, where people worship their dead ancestors, trying to please them, making sure they don't displease them, offering them sacrifices? Well, we know the Bible tells us the condition of the dead. They are sleeping, not conscious of nothing. So again, futile to try and please these ones or worship them. And in fact, many times it's dangerous trying to do so, especially communicating with them, because we know the demons are involved when it comes to that kind of communication. What about interfaith worship? We know we're not going to get involved in any other form of religion when we worship Jehovah, the true God. But we have to be careful when it comes to the celebrations that we see in the world around us. We want to make sure that we have nothing to do with any of these false religious celebrations. And even when it comes to marriage, we want to make sure that we marry someone who worships the true God, Jehovah. What about immoral conduct? Something that is common in the world today, common even in false religion. Some false religions actually promote immoral conduct. But how does Jehovah feel about this? Well, let's turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verses 9 and 10. Or do you not know that unrighteous people will not inherit God's kingdom? Do not be misled. Those who are sexually immoral, idolaters, adulterers, men who submit to homosexual acts, men who practice homosexuality, thieves, greedy people, drunkards, revilers, and extortioners will not inherit God's kingdom. So again, Jehovah is very clear in telling us in his word, the Bible, that he does not accept immoral conduct. So those that do promote such things or who are involved in such things will not be acceptable to our God, Jehovah. Then we have the teaching or common practice, belief in the world, in false religion, that we should put the pursuit of riches ahead of worship to God. If we think about it, most people that pursue riches don't become rich. There's very few in the world that are really rich. So most are just wasting their time and their energy trying to get rich. But let's have a look at Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24. Jesus there says, no one can slave for two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will stick to the one and despise the other. You cannot slave for God and for riches. And then Jesus went on to say in verse 33 that if we put Jehovah's kingdom first and his righteousness first, then Jehovah will make sure that we have what is necessary in life. And so we want to put the worship of the only true God first in our life. So in our discussion, we've seen that there's only one true God, one road leading to that true God. But we as individuals still have to choose to be on that road. We already saw that 2 Timothy 3 verses 16, 17, the Bible is inspired of God. It's our plans that we follow in our worship to Him. So when we study the Bible, we learn how Jehovah wants us to worship Him. We learn what is acceptable to Him and what is not acceptable to Him. As we get to know Jehovah better, by studying the Bible, we draw closer to Him. Our desire to please Him strengthens. Why? Because we realize what a wonderful, amazing God Jehovah is. He's done so much for us, does so much for us, and will still do so much for us. It's quite amazing to think that the Almighty God, the creator of all things, the most important, powerful personage in all existence, invites you and I to have a close personal relationship with Him. And that is what James 4 verse 8 brings out. If we draw close to God, He will draw close to us. If you have a good friend, what do you normally do? You tell other people about that good friend, don't you? And so that is what we do. As we get to know Jehovah, we become His friends, we naturally want to go out and tell other people about Him. Brothers and sisters, counterfeit goods only bring temporary joy. And that's because they are either of inferior quality to the real thing, or they have no quality at all. And that's the same with false worship. False worship can only bring temporary, most times perceived joy. And that's because false worship has no quality at all. But what about true worship? Let's turn to Isaiah chapter 25 and verse 9. Isaiah 25 and verse 9. In that day they will say, look, this is our God. We have hoped in Him, and He will save us. This is Jehovah. We have hoped in Him. Let us be joyful and rejoice in the salvation by Him. So yes, true worship, worshiping Jehovah, brings us joy every day of our life. And it's everlasting joy, because we look forward to living forever serving Jehovah. So, if someone asks you, who is your God? What will your answer be? I worship the true God, Jehovah, and I will do so for all eternity.